What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I'm making this video just because I want to go through this article. There was an article that I found on Bleacher Report, and it's grading all the teams' free agency signings and so forth, right? Everything that they did in free agency, gave them a grade, and kind of gave there a little bit of an explanation as to why they gave that grade. And so, look, this particular article I don't really agree with. As you guys know, I'm not particularly satisfied with how they've handled free agency. Most notably for me, it's a combination of the players that they chose, the prices that they decided to give them, right? The amount of money that they decided to give these guys. I think they overpaid for the majority of the players that they signed, and how they designed the contract. So it's a combination of all those things, right? The players wouldn't necessarily be bad, right? I think that, at least as I've said before, on paper, they have improved the team. However, there's absolutely no guarantee that any of them are going to actually pay off, especially considering the prices that they've given them. It's going to be difficult for them to actually live up to the contracts. And, so anyway, that's what I think. But let's go ahead and get into this. So first and foremost, they gave the Miami Dolphins an A, which it's interesting because I saw a thing. There was a tweet. I think I retweeted it. It had, and I think I even, commented on it too, retweet with a comment, whatever. And it was talking about essentially the fans, right? What they think of it. And about 50%, it was a fan pulse poll that was done, and about 50% of the respondents thought they deserved an A for everything that they did. And then there was like 30-something% that thought, it was a B, and then like 5 or 10% was a C. They didn't have D or E grades even on the thing, so that seems a little strange to me off the bat. Why are there not even any options for lower grades? You're like just kind of setting it up so that way they have to have at least a decent grade. I mean, if the lowest you go is a C, well, that's kind of not exactly the best way to start the poll to begin with. But regardless, the fans think that this offseason so far in free agency has been wonderful. And I've talked about same fan polls. The fan base, over 70% still thinks that the Dolphins are going in the right direction. And maybe they are. Again, I could be totally proven wrong. And again, I hope that they do prove me wrong. It just doesn't add up to me. I would venture to guess, though, that if this season doesn't go well, then that will likely start to have a turn. But we'll see. People oftentimes just believe the shit that they're told. Oftentimes people leave out incredibly relevant information or data points or, facts or evidence that is relevant to the evaluation and ultimately the ways in which you predict on how things are going to come about. Anyway, so most people think they did fucking wonderful. Obviously, you guys know that I don't really think that they've done wonderful. I don't think this is the way to go, and they've clearly set themselves up to trade up to get their quarterback. I mean, if they don't do it with everything that they've done, especially since they massively focused on defense, but then on offense, they focused on the offensive line, got 2 guys there, and a running back, which again, in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. I actually do think that they addressed a lot of holes, although they certainly could have spent the money better and got more higher caliber players, right? Not necessarily elite or stars or anything like that, but average or above average players to help also fill out the depth, and not just, 4 or 5 big name guys that you think are gonna fucking whatever. I mean, and again, there's no guarantee that they're going to work well together, that they're going to fit well in the schemes, that, you know, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. Anyway, let's get into this, though. So key additions and re-signings. Offensive line, Eric Flowers. Running back, Jordan Howard. Cornerback, Byron Jones. Edge, Shaq Lawson. Edge, Emmanuel Ogbah. Linebacker, Kyle Van Noy. And center guard, Ted Karras. Key departures, they say none. I don't exactly agree with that. I would say that despite the fact that he was getting older and injured, etc., I would say Rashad Jones is a pretty key departure. I mean, even if you just want to look at it from the aspect of how much money was cleared off the books because of it, I would think it's a pretty key departure. Okay, fine. And I would also say that Kilgore is a pretty key departure. Now, you could certainly argue that the hole was filled, that they brought in Ted Karras for that exact reason, and I would agree for the most part there. But it's still a departure, and a pretty major one, especially since we don't know if Ted Karras is actually going to work out for us yet, because he's never even played in a Dolphins uniform. Let's continue. This is the analysis. The Dolphins came into free agency with more money to spend than any other team. Absolutely factual. And they chose to invest heavily in defense. Also factual. Head coach Brian Flores leaned into his New England roots with the acquisition of Kyle Van Noy, true, and Miami brought in pass rushers Emmanuel Ogbah and Shaq Lawson as well. Very true. But without any actual details. Now again, I mean, this is just a in this particular article, it's just generalized, overall grades, and I'm sure in the dude's mind, he's got some of the figures and statistics to help his evaluation. Maybe not, since he has to cover all 32 teams. Maybe he doesn't even go into that depth with each of these players. But I mean, look, none of those guys have had 10 sacks in a season. If I'm correct about that, I'm pretty sure I am. They've all been okay. So again, on paper, it's an upgrade, but we have to wait and see if that actually translates. And they were all certainly overpaid for what they've proven. And they're all, again, at least 25 years old. So, Byron Jones, I think, is 28. Kyle Van Noy, I think, is also 28, right? So they're either in the mid or the mid area or back end of their primes. They're not going to get any better or healthier as they continue to go on, right? So it just saying the names, right? That's part of it, right? For people who don't actually understand the nuance or have all the data or information, or frankly for people who don't care, they just like the names, right? And look, I'll even agree that back when Ndamukong Suh signed with the team, I was like, man, that's all we need for our defense. I fell into it briefly. I was like, man, if we could just get him, then our defense is going to be stout. That defensive line, part of my evaluation was his pedigree, but it didn't work out, and he was vastly overpaid and certainly couldn't live up to it. So just saying the names doesn't fucking mean anything. There's Kyle Van Noy, he is not the only player that was on the Patriots defense, and they were coached by Bill Belichick. So there's a lot of other factors that go into it. But again, even in that system and with that coach, etc., he still never, broke 10 sacks. He's never been this crazy sack artist, right? He's been all right. He's been solid. He's been a good player. But, that's kind of it. And not only that, but what's his name? That one, Vince Beagle, was supposed to be our Kyle Van Noy. He was supposed to be groomed up into that position. So instead of, vastly overpaying Kyle Van Noy, they could have maybe just, I don't know, groomed the guy that they brought in. And that fits that type of role, and then use that money elsewhere. But okay. So again, just saying the names, and then Shaq Lawson on a Bills defense that had, he had solid production last season, didn't break 10 sacks, but he had solid production. But again, tons of fucking other people. In fact, Jordan Phillips, who they actually got rid of, or didn't get rid of, I think he just decided to sign a contract with, I want to say the Cardinals in free agency. Anyway, he had more sacks than Shaq Lawson as a defensive tackle. So, and there's plenty of studs on that defense for the Bills. So, you know, that helped. Is that going to be the case in Miami? I mean, just off of name recognition, sure. But again, the name recognition and on paper doesn't fucking mean shit. How well do they fit into the schemes? How well do they adjust here? They got a ton of new faces, right? They have to build chemistry together. They have to blah, 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 stay healthy. There's tons of factors that go into this. All right, the Dolphins' splashiest signing was Byron Jones. They paid out big money, 5 years, $82.5 million, to get their own lockdown corner and improve their pass defense. Pause there for a quick second. When he says get their own lockdown corner, that kind of seems like the Dolphins didn't already have one. We did, Xavier Howard. He does have some off-the-field issues, unfortunately now, that are hopefully in his past, and he has some concerns over his knees. Because of the multiple surgeries that he's had. However, we had one, and we expect to have one going into this season. And up until him and Darius Slay got their new contracts, Byron Jones and Darius Slay, he was the highest paid corner in the league. So we already had one. Did we need another one? Yes. However, you could certainly argue that he's shown to have the ability to be somewhat of a lockdown corner, but he's also got like no ball skills. You know, at least Xavier Howard one year led the league with 7 interceptions. The dude's got 2 in his career and hasn't had one for like 2 years. So, I mean, is that likely to change? I don't know. We'll see. Maybe with X on the opposite side, you know, there's definitely potential opportunity, especially if our pass rush does improve. But they way overpaid him, and it's almost impossible for a guy like that to. Same thing with Ndamukong Suh. Like, as great as Ndamukong Suh is or was, whatever, the amount of money they gave him for the position he was at was never going to get it, right? He was never going to live up to that potential. Now, you could argue that a cornerback could live up to that kind of potential, but when you look at this dude's track record and his history and the kind of player he is, he might be, you know, a football player, and he might love the game and blah, 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 and he might be able to lock down to some degree, but he's not shown that he's been to one Pro Bowl, never any All-Pro, you know, first team or second team, none of that, right? So, like, anyway, the offense wasn't a big priority, but Miami still made moves to bring it up to speed. Jordan Howard gives the Dolphins a power back after options at the position became thin for them last year. That's true, and we definitely needed help there. I don't mind that signing overall. The contract is okay, right? That was one of the better contracts, but at the same time, at that point, they had already signed Shaq Lawson and Eric Flowers and Kyle Van Noy and Byron Jones to massive deals, so they had already blown through cap space. Eric Flowers redeemed some of his value as a guard last season, 5 years into his career, with Washington, but the Dolphins may have overspent on him. May, I think, is a little bit of an understatement. I think that they absolutely did, especially, again, at guard. To me, the foundation of your offensive line is not your guards. Those are not the premier positions on the offensive line. It's your center and your bookend tackles. Those are the more important positions on the offensive line. And again, as much as I don't want to be the Patriots, certainly one good thing that they have done is they understand that. They invested more. I mean, they don't really pay anybody big contracts, but they certainly would give bigger contracts to their center and their tackles, because that's the skeleton of the offensive line. And they would constantly revolve. The door would revolve at guard, right? At like every year, they would pretty much have new guards, because they would just, you know, they would get whatever use out of them, and they would sign, you know, cheap guys with high upside. Anyway, let's see. They can afford to do that with all the cap space they had this offseason. So technically that is correct. Sure, they had the money, and sure, they can absolutely spend it. But I would argue that spending it wisely and spending it, you know, efficiently is far better than just going out and fucking spending it just to spend it, which is somewhat what they did. Again, sure, they definitely, you know, filled some areas of need. They, on paper, improved the pass rush and the pass defense, and the offensive line and the running back room on paper, but is it going to actually translate? All right, bottom line for them. The Dolphins figured to be one of the biggest spenders in free agency, true, and they didn't disappoint, also true. It's easy to like where they spent their money too. So, real quick on that line. As it's stated, it's easy to like where. He says where they spent their money, not how they spent their money, but where they spent their money. And there is a differentiation to be made, and that is where they spent their money. Yeah, I don't look. I wanted them to fix the offensive line. We certainly needed running back help. We definitely needed to improve the pass rush, and we needed a corner opposite Xavier Howard. So absolutely. And we didn't have like any safeties anymore. So bringing in the one dude, Fedulum, right? Like Clayton Fedulum. Okay. So where they spent their money, the positions that they addressed, sure. But how they spent their money, again, to me, the players, the combination of the players that they chose, the amount of money that they chose to give these players, and then subsequently how they designed the contracts, i.e., the vast majority of it, like half of their contracts or more, in several of the cases, 2/3 of their contracts are fully guaranteed. Like Eric Flowers, Kyle Van Noy, Byron Jones, half or 2/3 of their contracts are fully guaranteed. Fully guaranteed. That's good for the players, and they're super front loaded. So if we don't get all the years, like Byron Jones, if they cut him next year or the year after, well, it doesn't matter for him. He's got fucking millions upon millions of dollars that the Dolphins have to give him. Even if they cut him, they'll end up having dead money, etc., that they owe him because of guaranteed money. Anyway, so, like guaranteed salary for the next year. You know, and so to me, it's just a disaster waiting to happen, but we'll see if they can actually put it together. So, you know, where they spent their money, the positions that they went after, yes. I don't like who they chose, the contracts they decided to give them, the amount of money, and how they designed them. Anyway, after sporting one of the league's worst defenses at pressuring the quarterback last year, they got multiple players who can help them get after pass rushers in 2020. Theoretically, absolutely, again, on paper, but as we've seen a million times over, paper doesn't mean shit. Paper doesn't play on Sundays, right? You can have the fucking all Madden team, you know, penciled in, but it doesn't fucking matter if you get your ass stomped on Sunday. The defense should be much improved after these signings, and Miami still has 3 first-round picks to fix the offense. And so the final thing, because this is the end of it, so again, should be much improved. That's an alright framing because should be, theoretically, on paper. No guarantee, and we have to wait and see how it plays out. And Miami still has 3 first-round picks. That's true for the time being. And it could remain true, it just depends. It depends on what they actually decide to do in free agency. However, again, I think that there is a high likelihood that they trade up. In fact, I think that is exactly what they are going to do. I'm getting more and more convinced as time goes on that the probability of them trading to the number 1 pick has drastically increased. But I still think overall, by a little bit, I still think that the most likely place that they go to will be the number 3 pick. However, I do not want to underestimate Stephen Ross's craven desperation, and I think that there is a substantial likelihood that they do go up to the number 1 pick. Either way, they are going to have to combine some kind of pick package that will diminish that number of picks. Okay, now, you know, they could go from 3 number 1 picks this year to 2, right? It depends. Maybe they give away their 5th and the 18th, but they still keep the 26th, and then whatever, you know, and then the number 1 or the number 3 overall pick. So they would still have 2 picks in that case, but if they decided to give away the 5th, the 18th, and the 26th, which is definitely possible, especially if you've looked at history and even recent history, the Dolphins could theoretically even give all 3 of our first round picks and a second round pick. Okay, because that has happened in recent history. Okay, so to go up to the number 1 spot if they so chose. And I think that there is a high likelihood that they do that. In that case, then they would only have one number one pick, one first round pick, and obviously it would be used on the offense, a quarterback, but then you are neglecting other areas. Again, it's putting way too many resources in too few places. And really just, gambling, because you just don't know. And then, so that's the thing, right? So if they move up, let's say they do that. Let's say they move up. Let's say they go to the number one spot. Let's say they give away the 5th pick, the 18th pick, the 26th pick, and then one of our second rounders. Okay, what if they do that? What if they give away 4 selections, all 3 of our firsts, and one of our second to move up to the number one spot with the Cincinnati Bengals, and let's say they take Joe Burrow, okay? He's healthy, he's the Heisman Trophy winner, he's the presumptive number one pick, etc., etc., etc. Stephen Ross apparently loves him, although there have been reports that he loves all the quarterbacks in the draft, so whatever. But if they do that, and then what if Eric Flowers and Ted Karras don't work out, and they didn't actually take any high, Dieter was trash. What if he doesn't fucking, improve anywhere near enough? And then what if they don't take an offensive lineman until, again, like round 3 or later, and then the offensive line sucks again, and then Joe Burrow gets fucking his face smashed in because there's no offensive line? And what if Jordan Howard isn't enough to overcome the fact that there's no holes for him, and then our run offense is shit again, right? So, I mean, again, we have to wait and see how all these things play out. They could prove me wrong. I hope they prove me wrong, but they have to prove me wrong. They don't get the credit before it's due, and I have to be fair, and I have to be objective, and I have to give it to you guys as factually as possible with the best analysis as possible. And just real quick, again, that's why I do try and give you guys opinions that are not necessarily my own, because I want to make sure that you have all the data. I like you to have different perspectives from different people and different sources, and for you guys to make up your minds on your own. I think that I am by far the most objective and unbiased of all the Dolphins YouTube creators, as well as, I would say, at least in my first, year or so, or last year, I think I was the most correct about things. There were certainly some things that I was wrong about, but I think overall in my predictions and assertions, I was proven correct. So we'll have to see how year 2 of this Brian Flores, Chris Greer, Marvin Allen, Reggie McKenzie, Stephen Ross, love fucking circle, whatever it is, works out, right? Let's see if they can put it together. Alright, that's what I got for you. I'm going to get up out of here. I hope you guys enjoy my videos and perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comments section. And of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Phins up.